The hidden cost of bowing first why apology can be a power trap. You were taught that an apology is a badge of integrity. That saying "I'm sorry" is what decent people do. That it's noble to admit your wrongs, to lower your head, and to let others see your remorse. But what if that very ritual, what we call virtue, is actually a velvet noose? What if the first time you bow, you never stand quite as tall again? Machiavelli understood something most people refuse to see, that in the realm of power, perception is often more real than reality. And once you perform submission, once you publicly confess, you hand others a weapon they'll keep using long after the wound has closed. You invite judgment, you invite mockery. And worst of all, you teach people where your pressure points are. Think about it. When a public figure apologizes, do the critics truly stop, or do the accusations multiply? The apology once offered becomes the first line in a new narrative, not one of healing but of control. Suddenly, everyone has jurisdiction over your name, your motives, your legacy. You've surrendered your height on the stage, and now you're eye level with the mob. That's no longer respect. That's exposure. An apology often isn't a simple act of remorse. It's a transfer of power. You move from being the author of your story to a defendant in theirs. Your words, your tone, your vulnerability become theater for people who want not healing, but leverage. And in the court of public opinion, they don't want closure. They want spectacle. This doesn't mean you never feel regret. But Machiavellian wisdom reminds us, regret is internal, correction is strategic. The moment you externalize your guilt, especially through a public apology, you open yourself to manipulation. What began as an honest expression quickly becomes a permanent label. You're no longer the one who erred. You're the one who admitted guilt. In the modern world where outrage is currency and shame is entertainment, apology has become inflationary. Everyone is forced to apologize for everything until the word loses meaning. What stands out now is not who grovels, but who doesn't. The unapologetic man, the one who corrects without confessing, radiates something different: stability, mystery, power. So before you apologize, ask yourself, is this healing or is it handing over ammunition? Are you restoring trust or lowering your crown? Because in the game of perception, the man who bows first is rarely allowed to rise again. The power of silence. Why the loudest apology is still weaker than a quiet mind. In a world obsessed with loud confessions and public remorse, silence has become the rarest and most unsettling response. That's not an accident, it's strategy. Machiavelli, with his cold, calculating gaze on power, understood what few dare to admit: the one who remains silent holds all the cards. The one who doesn't rush to explain, defend, or apologize becomes unpredictable. And in the realm of influence, unpredictability is leverage. When a man remains silent after being accused or attacked, the crowd begins to guess. They argue. They debate. But here's the key they don't know. That uncertainty is more powerful than any apology could ever be. Because once you speak, once you admit, explain, or clarify, you surrender control of the narrative. You give your enemies something to quote, something to spin, something to stain your reputation forever. But if you remain silent, they're forced to fill in the blanks with fear, doubt, and projection. Silence unsettles people because it removes their favorite weapon: certainty. They can't clip a soundbite from silence. They can't manipulate a quiet stare. And they definitely can't use ambiguity as evidence. That's what Machiavelli knew: ambiguity protects power. The fog is a fortress. The moment you break it with a confession, you invite precision, and precision is what assassins use. Some will call this manipulation. Let them. In politics, business relationships, silence isn't just absence. It's armor. It forces others to overreach, over-explain, and reveal their own hand while you sit still, unmoved, undisturbed. And as they grow louder, more desperate to make you speak, you become more powerful by contrast. The lion does not answer every bark. You don't need to justify yourself to people who seek only control, not understanding. When you do, you shrink. But when you stay composed, eyes locked and expression unreadable, the power dynamic tilts in your favor. You aren't avoiding accountability. You're refusing to play a game rigged to make you smaller. Let them wonder if you'll strike back. Let them question whether your silence is preparation or dismissal. That doubt is your message, and it echoes louder than any apology ever could. In a world where everyone is confessing for clicks, panicking for approval, or explaining themselves into weakness, silence becomes its own language, a language of kings. So, speak less, observe more, and when the time comes to act, let your actions be the only sentence they can quote. Fix the damage, not the image. Why action always outweighs apology. When the weight of failure crushes your chest and your instinct is to run to the nearest microphone to say, "I'm sorry," loud enough to silence the shame pause, breathe, and ask yourself a brutal question. Do I want to be forgiven or do I want to be respected again? Machiavelli had no patience for empty remorse. In his world and ours, words without strategy are theater. And public apology is often just that, a performance, a symbolic sacrifice to gain favor. But favor fades, respect sticks, and respect is rarely born from speeches. It's built through results. If you've made a mistake, caused harm, or fallen short, there's only one move that restores power: deliver more than you took away. Don't confess, correct. Don't narrate your guilt, neutralize the consequences. The public wants to feel that you've learned, yes, but more than that, they want to benefit from your learning. They don't need your sob story, they need proof. Apology is about perception. Action is about impact. And in a world saturated with apologies, action feels like a revolution. Imagine the difference. One man breaks something and spends a month talking about how sorry he is. Another says nothing but replaces what was broken with something stronger. Who do you remember? Who do you trust more? Correction without confession shifts the entire emotional dynamic. It removes pity and replaces it with earned authority. It tells the world, I don't need you to like me. I need you to see that I fix what I touch. That's a message people remember and reward. This doesn't mean becoming cold or avoiding accountability. On the contrary, it means embracing a higher standard of accountability, one where responsibility is expressed not through tears, but through transformation. Regret is common. Effective change is rare. Be the rare one. In personal relationships, this means showing up differently, not making dramatic declarations. In leadership, it means reinforcing what you broke, not launching PR tours. In business, it means over-delivering until people forget the misstep and remember the momentum. When done right, action rewrites memory. Faster than apology rewires emotion. Time softens the story, but results can erase it entirely. So if you want redemption, don't beg for it. Build it. Let your correction be so undeniable that the apology becomes irrelevant. Because in the end, the world doesn't truly forgive your confession. It forgives your competence. The apology economy. When remorse becomes cheap and dangerous. Once upon a time, saying "I'm sorry" meant something. It carried weight. It implied sincerity, courage, and a desire to make things right. But today, apology isn't sacred, it's currency. And like any currency flooded into the market, it's lost its value. Welcome to the apology economy, where remorse is transactional, manufactured, and endlessly demanded. We live in a culture where public apologies have become rituals of survival. One misstep, intentional or not, and the mob circles. PR firms draft sorrowful statements, hashtags trend, pundits bark, and the world watches not for accountability but for blood. The confession isn't meant to heal, it's meant to feed. Machiavelli would smirk. He warned long ago that when power apologizes, it invites enemies to grow teeth. And in today's climate, he'd say the same thing: the more you confess, the more they consume you. The first "I'm sorry" becomes the headline. The second becomes the meme. The third becomes your entire identity. You're no longer a person. You're the symbol of failure, a case study in collapse. And here's the sinister truth: most of the people demanding your apology, they were never hurt. They just want access to your guilt. Because guilt, once made public, becomes usable, marketable. You cry, they get clicks. You kneel, they sell outrage. What you thought was healing becomes content. Meanwhile, the real victims, if they exist, are buried under noise. Their resolution, their healing is rarely the priority. The spectacle is. So what do you do in this sea of over-apology and performative guilt? You become rare. You become quiet. You become strategic. If you must acknowledge fault, do it once, precisely, and always with outcome attached. Better yet, skip the theater entirely and repair what's broken with silent excellence. Because here's what Machiavelli knew: people eventually forget what made them angry, but they never forget what made them impressed. They remember who kept building while others begged. They respect the one who refused to feed the mob and thrived anyway. And as the apology economy continues to inflate, you must ask yourself, what is more valuable today? Another recycled, "I'm sorry," or the mystery of someone who simply keeps rising, so mint a rarer currency? Let your silence unsettle. Let your results restore. And let the crowd burn out from chasing the one man who refuses to auction off his dignity for their brief applause. The weaponized apology. How to turn contrition into control. Most people apologize to be liked, to make peace, to earn forgiveness. But a Machiavellian doesn't apologize for peace. He apologizes for power. He understands that a true apology is not a ritual of self-sacrifice. It's a weapon, one that can open locked doors, disarm an enemy, or defuse a threat if wielded with precision. The problem isn't apology itself. It's how cheaply it's used. Most people throw it around like confetti, hoping to buy back trust. But every time you say, "I'm sorry," out of fear instead of strategy, you lower your status. You lose leverage. And worst of all, you hand the other person control of the narrative. That's why Machiavelli taught never apologize unless the apology itself becomes a sharper blade than the one pointed at you. A true apology, when necessary, must be surgical. It should be brief, targeted, and delivered only when it changes outcomes in your favor. Not to appease emotion, not to appear virtuous, but to buy time, reset the field, or create tactical distance. Want an example? You've said something controversial and now the media storms in. The average man crumbles, begs for grace, and becomes a soundbite. But the strategist, he offers a carefully worded phrase. "If my words caused offense, that was not the intent." It sounds soft, but it says nothing. No confession, no liability, just fog. And in that fog, power regathers. Or imagine this: a crucial alliance is on the verge of collapse due to a misstep. This is where a private surgical apology becomes useful. You meet behind closed doors. You address a narrow piece of the issue. You offer concrete repair, no public performance, and you leave with the relationship restored and your dignity intact. Outside that room, you announce only the renewed partnership. That's it. Because here's the Machiavellian truth: the more people hear you say, "I was wrong," the more they believe you're always wrong. But if they see you adjust, adapt, and dominate without needing to bleed publicly, they begin to associate you with competence, not contrition. So don't reject apology altogether. Just stop treating it like a religion. Make it a tool, a pressure valve, a sword in disguise. Apologize not to bow, but to move your pieces, to end a standoff, to bait your enemy into lowering their guard. And once the advantage is gained, withdraw the apology like a dagger hidden in velvet, and strike forward. The fortress of ambiguity. Why uncertainty shields the powerful. In a culture that demands clarity, the most powerful move is to remain unreadable. When people expect confession, explanation, or closure, and you offer none, you become something far more dangerous than guilty. You become untouchable. Machiavelli understood the power of ambiguity not as indecision, but as strategic fog. Because the moment you clarify, you become a target. The moment you confess, the verdict is sealed. But when you remain vague, you allow stories to splinter, rumors to contradict each other, and critics to fight among themselves. In the void of certainty, you control the tension. This is the Machiavellian paradox. By refusing to explain yourself, you protect yourself. Clarity is a cage. Ambiguity is a weapon. Think about it. When someone attacks you publicly and you say nothing, what happens? At first they seem powerful, loud, convincing. But as time passes and you remain silent, the energy turns. People begin to question the accuser. Why hasn't he responded? Is he ignoring it? Is he preparing something bigger? Doubt creeps in. Speculation fractures the initial outrage. And you stay centered. You observe. You let the storm exhaust itself. When you remain ambiguous, you force others to fill in the blanks. But humans don't fill blanks with logic, they fill them with projection. They guess, and in guessing, they expose their own fears, assumptions, and agendas. Meanwhile, you withhold just enough to remain dangerous, just enough to be mysterious, just enough to keep the room tilted toward your gravity. This applies everywhere: leadership, relationships, public image. The person who reveals too much too soon becomes predictable, and predictability is the opposite of power. But the one who speaks carefully, rarely, and with deliberate gaps, that person becomes a riddle the world tries to solve. And that chase gives you time, space, and advantage. Ambiguity doesn't mean cowardice. It means control. It's not avoiding the truth, it's choosing when and how truth appears, if ever. It's refusing to be pinned down, labeled, or reduced to someone else's version of events. So when you're tempted to defend yourself, to clarify, to set the record straight, pause. Ask, will clarity serve me here or expose me? Will it resolve the issue or simply mark me for judgment? The greatest power often lies not in what you say, but in what you don't. The fortress of ambiguity may be invisible, but its walls are thick, and its silence echoes louder than any confession ever could. Mastering the self. Why emotional independence is the real power. The world doesn't just test your strength, it tests your stability, your ability to remain composed when criticized, calm when cornered, and sharp when others crumble. In that chaos, emotional independence becomes your sharpest edge. Machiavelli saw it clearly. The man who does not need emotional validation becomes ungovernable. Most people confuse apology with growth. They believe that to be noble is to bleed publicly, to show remorse as proof of maturity. But when you tether your worth to how others perceive your sorrow, you hand them your internal compass. You no longer move with sovereignty. You move to avoid rejection. You speak to avoid being misunderstood. You apologize to feel accepted, not to repair anything meaningful. That's not growth. That's dependency. True power begins the moment you stop chasing emotional clearance from the crowd, when you no longer need their applause or their permission to course correct, when you learn to fix the consequences without collapsing under the guilt. Guilt has its place, but it must be kept on a leash. Left unchecked, it becomes self-sabotage dressed as sensitivity. You start over-apologizing, over-analyzing, and worst of all, second-guessing your every move. You clip your own wings before anyone else can even aim. That's why emotional independence is not coldness, it's clarity. It's knowing the difference between internal accountability and external performance. You can feel regret privately and still refuse to perform submission publicly. You can correct yourself without letting others dictate the narrative of your identity. In personal relationships, this means standing firm even when someone demands a theatrical apology to feel superior. It means offering consistency over confession, reliability over remorse, and letting your presence, not your pleas, speak for your evolution. In leadership, it means understanding that people don't follow perfect leaders, they follow stable ones. The leader who learns, silently adjusts without making a spectacle, and executes relentlessly becomes untouchable, not because they never fail, but because they never spiral. So if you find yourself plagued with the need to explain, to justify, to be understood, pause. Ask yourself, do I need forgiveness or do I need discipline? Do I want approval or do I want results? Emotional independence is not the absence of feeling, it's the mastery of feeling. And in a world that weaponizes guilt, that mastery is the last true form of freedom. Stay grounded, stay focused, feel but never kneel. Love without kneeling. Why consistency matters more than I'm sorry. In love, we're told that vulnerability is everything, that apologies heal, that saying I'm sorry is the golden bridge back to trust. But here's what they don't tell you: over time, words fade and patterns stay. And if all you offer is remorse without change, without correction, you're not building love. you're feeding a cycle. Machiavelli would argue that even an intimacy strategy matters. Not manipulation, but maturity, with precision. Because no matter how tender the relationship, the dynamics of power still apply. And in this arena, results outweigh regret every single time. Anyone can say I'm sorry in a moment of guilt. Anyone can cry promise and perform. But love, like influence, isn't kept through performance, it's kept through proof. A real partner doesn't just apologize, they adjust. They recognize the hurt, recalibrate their behavior, and offer consistency as the apology the other person didn't even have to ask for. That's what true responsibility looks like, not kneeling for forgiveness, but rising every day with actions that prevent the same wound from happening again. Over-apologizing, especially in emotionally charged relationships, does more harm than good. It creates a ledger, an emotional balance sheet where every mistake becomes a permanent line item. You said you wouldn't do that again becomes a refrain. The apology once sacred becomes ammunition. And suddenly love turns into litigation. If you want to be trusted, don't confess, be reliable. If you want to be respected, don't promise, deliver. That's the quiet language of devotion, the kind that doesn't beg for another chance, but earns it by being unshakable in the next one. Think about the strongest relationships you've seen. They're not perfect. They're not tear-free, but they're steady. They're built on people who learned from their slip-ups and came back stronger, not with declarations, but with discipline. So the next time you feel the need to say, I'm sorry, ask yourself first, have I already shown it? Have I taken steps? Have I made it impossible for the same pain to return, if not speak less and do more? Because love is not a courtroom, it's a kingdom. And the person who rules it well isn't the one who pleads for mercy. It's the one who shows up every day ready to protect it with quiet resolve, unwavering effort, and the strength to turn remorse into something far more powerful. Trust. Guard the crown. Why protecting reputation is smarter than rebuilding it. A name takes years to build and seconds to stain. In the arena of power perception is reality, and reputation is your crown. Once it's dented, you don't just lose favor. You lose momentum, leverage, and often the right to be taken seriously again. That's why Machiavelli taught this brutal but essential truth. It is far easier to defend a reputation than to resurrect one. You might think the world is forgiving, that if you make a mistake, say the right things, and apologize publicly, you'll earn redemption. But more often than not, you don't get redemption. You get reduction in status, in respect, in authority. The apology becomes your identity. The failure becomes your headline. Once you apologize, especially in public, your misstep becomes canon. People don't remember the correction. They remember the confession. You might fix everything, but the echo that lasts is he admitted he was wrong, even if the offense was minor, even if the accusation was twisted. And here's where it gets dangerous. Once the public sees that you can be humbled, they start testing how low you'll go. They push further. They see your remorse as weakness, not virtue. They forget your accomplishments and remember your stumble. One crack in the armor and suddenly everyone wants to aim for the gap. This is why powerful individuals, those who survive political scandals, public criticism, or even personal betrayals, often never publicly apologize. They redirect, they rebuild, they return with results so undeniable that the story shifts, because action rewrites history far faster than explanation ever could. If you've built a reputation, protect it like a fortress. Be cautious about what you admit, and even more cautious about how. Once you label yourself the villain, others will write your ending for you. But if you hold steady, if you repair the damage behind the scenes and return stronger, you control the narrative. That's the Machiavellian path, not denial, not cold arrogance, but strategic preservation. Fix the broken pieces in silence. Let your next move speak so loudly that the past becomes irrelevant. In this world, you're not just managing what's true, you're managing what people remember. And people remember strength, especially silent strength. So before you confess to the crowd, ask yourself, is this the story I want etched into my legacy, or can I rewrite it through action, not apology? Your crown is easier to defend than to rebuild. Guard it. Ruthlessly. Build or beg. Why legacy belongs to the relentless. In a world obsessed with public penance, there's a dangerous myth circulating that history remembers those who apologize. It doesn't. It remembers those who build, who fall, rise and rise again, not because they begged for forgiveness, but because they refused to stay down. That's the truth Machiavelli carved into the bedrock of legacy. It belongs to the relentless, not the remorseful. Look back at the titans of power. Caesar didn't stop to apologize before crossing the Rubicon. Napoleon didn't send letters of regret from exile. Great CEOs under fire didn't crumble under public shame. They vanished into operations returned with profit and let performance do what no apology ever could: reclaim control. When you pause to explain your intentions, to confess, to kneel, you stall your forward motion. And in that stillness, the world moves past you. People forget what you built. They remember that you hesitated, that you tried to justify yourself to those who never wanted understanding, just your surrender. But when you choose movement over mourning, when you return with undeniable results, the narrative shifts. They say, he's back, he's better, maybe he never fell at all. That is the beauty of progress. It doesn't erase the past, it eclipses it. Even in intimate relationships, this principle holds. You can cry, say, I'm sorry, and make promises. But what your partner really remembers, the thing that sticks, is whether you showed up differently. Whether you became the person who no longer repeated the mistake. Words are temporary, patterns are permanent. This doesn't mean you lack empathy. It means you honor regret by converting it into fuel. You don't kneel in front of guilt, you rise above it with focus. That's how you keep your spine straight, your momentum alive, and your dignity intact. Machiavelli saw this long before social media weaponized shame. People respect power, not apologies. They follow vision, not tears. They remember the empire you built, not the moment you broke. So build, in silence if you must. Let the critics shout while you shape something lasting. Let their outrage fade while your results rise. Let them wonder how you never cracked, how you kept moving when most would have crumbled. And when they whisper, he never even said sorry. Let your legacy respond with something far more powerful than remorse: achievement. Because in the end, history doesn't remember how well you apologized. It remembers what you left behind. Power in practice. Lessons from a Machiavellian code of conduct. In a culture where overexposure is common and emotional vulnerability is often mistaken for strength, the teachings behind why Machiavelli said you should never apologize deliver a counterintuitive but powerful message: guard your dignity, move with precision, and let your actions speak louder than your remorse. The first major lesson is that not every mistake requires a public apology. In fact, in many situations, especially in business leadership and relationships, apologizing too quickly or too often can actually weaken your position. You may think you're showing humility, but what others see is insecurity, a need for approval, or worse, guilt they can exploit. Instead, shift your energy from explaining your intentions to correcting the outcomes. Did you miss a deadline? Don't dwell. Deliver ahead of schedule next time. Did you hurt someone? Don't just say, I'm sorry. Change your behavior consistently and quietly. Let the results prove your growth. Another key takeaway: ambiguity is not weakness, it's protection. In a world that pressures you to explain everything, strategic silence creates leverage. It keeps people guessing. It prevents others from reducing your complexity to a single moment of weakness. And most importantly, legacy is built not by those who pause to plead, but by those who press forward with relentless clarity. Remorse has its place, but in the long game of life, it's what you build, not what you confess, that shapes how you're remembered. So as you navigate your career, relationships, and personal development, ask not, how can I be forgiven? But instead, how can I demonstrate strength, growth, and unshakable resolve? That's the real apology the world respects.